sign the prenup, gold digger. You bring absolutely nothing to this family." My fiancé's mother sneered across the table at our rehearsal dinner, right in front of 60 high society guests. I didn't cry, blush, or flinch under her contemptuous gaze. I simply read the predatory document, picked up a pen, and opened my own thick leather folder. My future father-in-law, sitting near the back, nearly knocked his chair over as he scrambled to his feet in absolute horrified shock. My name is Madison Huff. To understand why a leather folder at a rehearsal dinner shattered a multi-generational corporate dynasty, you have to look into the bitter, status-driven world of the Sterling family in Boston, Massachusetts. For 2 years, I had been engaged to Julian Sterling, the heir to Sterling Maritime Logistics, a 90-year-old shipping and port management corporation headquartered along the Boston waterfront. Julian's mother, Eleanor Sterling, was a woman whose entire identity was built on old money arrogance, country club prestige, and extreme social snobbery. Eleanor viewed everyone outside her tightly knit social circle as a low-class opportunist trying to leech off her family's wealth. From the moment Julian introduced me to his family, Eleanor made her disdain crystal clear. She made passive-aggressive comments about my wardrobe, scoffed at my modest suburban upbringing, and repeatedly reminded me that Julian was destined to marry a woman from a prominent political family in New England. My fiancé, Julian, was a gentle, quiet man who was thoroughly dominated by his mother's overbearing personality. Whenever Eleanor made cruel remarks about my background, Julian would squeeze my hand, apologize in private, and beg me to be patient, claiming his mother was just fiercely protective of the family legacy. What Eleanor, Julian, and the rest of Boston high society did not know was that I was not some helpless, penniless girl who had stumbled into Julian's life by accident. I was a senior partner at Vanguard Corporate Restructuring and Forensic Auditing, one of the most elite, quiet financial intelligence firms in the Northeast. For 7 years, I had specialized in forensic asset tracking, debt restructuring, and corporate solvency audits for Fortune 500 entities and private equity firms. I earned a high 7-figure income, owned 3 commercial properties in downtown Boston, and held substantial private equity holdings across private logistics networks. I had deliberately kept my professional credentials, financial status, and career success private from Eleanor. Julian knew I worked in finance, but because I preferred understated clothing and hated boasting, Eleanor simply assumed I was a low-level junior accountant earning a modest salary. I wanted Julian to love me for who I was as a person, not for my net worth. But I also wanted to see how his family would treat someone they believed was below them. The test reached its devastating climax at our rehearsal dinner. The event was held in the private grand ballroom of an exclusive harbor front club in Boston. 60 guests had gathered, including federal judges, corporate titans, maritime executives, and prominent politicians. The room was decorated with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and fine silver. Halfway through the second course, Eleanor stood up at the head of the main table, tapping her crystal glass with a silver spoon to command the room's attention. The room fell quiet as guests turned toward the head table, expecting a warm, celebratory toast to the bride and groom. Instead, Eleanor pulled a thick, 50-page legal document from her silk handbag and slid it aggressively across the white linen tablecloth right into the middle of my dinner plate.
Before we proceed any further with this wedding, we have a small piece of business to finalize, Eleanor announced, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics, echoing loudly off the marble pillars. This is a comprehensive prenuptial agreement drafted by the Sterling family's senior legal counsel. It strips you, Madison, of any right to Julian's assets, trust funds, real estate, or future inheritance in the event of a divorce. Furthermore, it waives all rights to alimony or spousal support. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Several guests looked down at their plates in awkward embarrassment, while others whispered behind their napkins. Eleanor leaned over the table, her face twisted into a cold, triumphant sneer as she handed me a heavy gold pen. "Sign it right now, gold digger," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with venom, loud enough for all 60 guests to hear. "You bring absolutely nothing to this family, and I will not allow a penniless nobody to leech off my son's legacy." Julian sat beside me, his face flushing deep red. He looked at his mother, then at the floor, completely paralyzed by fear, refusing to say a single word to defend his future wife. I looked at Eleanor. I looked at Julian. I felt no embarrassment, no shame, and no anger. A serene, ice-cold clarity washed over my mind. I picked up the pen, flipped through the pages of Eleanor's predatory prenup, and quietly signed my name on the final signature line. Eleanor smirked, reaching out her hand to snatch the signed document back. "Good girl, at least you know your place." "I'm not finished, Eleanor," I said smoothly, my voice calm, deep, and carrying across the quiet room. I reached down into my leather briefcase, resting beside my chair, pulled out a thick, black, leather-bound binder with silver foil lettering, and placed it firmly on the table in front of my mother-in-law. I flipped open the first tab of my folder, revealing certified corporate financial statements, offshore registry audits, and federal bank debt schedules. At the back of the room, sitting at a secondary table near the exit, my future father-in-law, Arthur Sterling Sr., the chairman of Sterling Maritime Logistics, glanced at the silver seal stamped on the front page of my folder. Arthur's eyes went wide as saucers, his face drained of every single drop of color. He nearly knocked his heavy oak chair over as he scrambled to his feet in absolute horrified shock, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of his table. "Arthur, what is wrong with you?" Eleanor snapped, glancing back at her husband with annoyance. "Sit down. I am handling this girl." "Eleanor, shut your mouth right now," Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic, stumbling forward through the tables toward our head table. "Shut up. You don't know what you're doing." I ignored Arthur's panic, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes as I turned the first page of my folder. "Allow me to educate you on the reality of the family you are so desperate to protect, Eleanor," I began, my voice steady, clear, and perfectly articulated. "This folder contains the 6-month forensic audit of Sterling Maritime Logistics, conducted by my firm, Vanguard Corporate Restructuring." Eleanor blinked, her sneer wavering slightly. Your firm?" "I am the senior managing partner and 60% owner of Vanguard," I continued, turning to the second tab. 3 months ago, Sterling Maritime Logistics defaulted on a $45 million institutional credit line with Boston Commercial Bank. To avoid public bankruptcy and federal receivership, your husband, Arthur, secretly sought a private equity bailout. The ballroom went deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet.
My firm, Vanguard, purchased that $45 million debt obligation from the bank 3 weeks ago, I said, sliding the third page toward Eleanor. Which means, as of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, I personally hold the primary mortgage liens on the Sterling Maritime headquarters, the private port terminals, and your family's estate in Martha's Vineyard. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked frantically at her husband, who was now standing beside her table, sweat dripping down his forehead, staring at me like I was an executioner. "Arthur, is this true?" Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. Arthur swallowed hard, his voice trembling violently. She owns our entire debt structure, Eleanor. If she calls the note, we are wiped out by Monday morning." I flipped to the 4th tab in my folder, leaning forward slightly. "It gets much worse, Eleanor. While auditing your family's corporate books, my forensic team uncovered $16 million in unauthorized offshore transfers executed by your son, Julian, over the past 18 months to cover his hidden gambling debts in Macau." Julian gasped, falling back into his chair, his face turning an ash-gray color, as every eyes in the room turned to lock onto him. Julian was facing federal corporate fraud charges and 5 years in federal prison, I said, looking at my fiancé with quiet disappointment. "I spent the last 2 weeks restructuring that debt privately, using $10 million of my personal liquidity to cover his shortfalls so your family wouldn't face total public disgrace and legal prosecution." I looked around the room at the 60 high society guests, who were now staring at Eleanor and Arthur with expressions of utter shock, disgust, and disbelief. I brought $45 million in debt relief, $10 million in private liquidity, and $35 million in personal real estate equity to this union, I stated, my voice echoing off the high marble ceiling. I was prepared to merge my wealth with your family's legacy and save your company from total destruction because I believed I loved your son. I stood up from the head table, smoothing down my tailored ivory silk dress, picking up my leather folder and tucking it under my arm. "I signed your prenup, Eleanor," I said, looking down at her as she sat frozen in her chair, weeping in utter humiliation. "Which means every dollar of my capital, every asset of my restructuring firm, and every cent of my liquidity remains strictly my personal property. Not a single dollar of my money will ever touch the Sterling family again." I turned to Julian, who was trembling, tears streaming down his face, reaching out to touch my arm. "Madison, please, I'm sorry. Don't do this. I didn't know." I pulled my hand back from his grip, looking at him with absolute, unshakable indifference. "You sat there silently while your mother humiliated me in front of 60 people, Julian," I said softly. "You showed me that you are not a man. You are just a coward hiding behind an empty family surname. The wedding is canceled." I walked down the long aisle of the ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. As I reached the grand double entrance doors, Arthur came running up behind me, throwing himself onto his knees on the carpet, clutching the hem of his jacket, sobbing desperately in front of his wealthy peers.
"Madison, please, I beg you," Arthur cried out, his hands clasped in frantic prayer. "If you call that $45 million debt, our company will be liquidated. We will lose our house. We will be ruined. Please have mercy on us." I paused at the doorway, looking down at the broken patriarch of the Sterling dynasty. "You should have taught your wife how to respect people, Arthur," I replied smoothly. "And you should have taught your son how to be a man." I stepped out of the ballroom, shut the grand oak doors behind me, and walked out into the cool Boston night air, completely free. The financial and social destruction of the Sterling family was swift, public, and absolute. First thing Monday morning, I instructed my legal team at Vanguard to issue a formal notice of default and immediate debt acceleration against Sterling Maritime Logistics. Unable to secure $45 million in liquid refinancing within 72 hours, the company was forced into immediate Chapter 11 corporate liquidation. My firm acquired the primary port facilities and commercial assets at court auction, stripping the Sterling family of their corporate power and control over the Boston waterfront. To settle the remaining personal liabilities and avoid federal prosecution for Julian's offshore embezzlement, Arthur and Eleanor were forced to liquidate all personal assets. Their private Martha's Vineyard estate, their luxury vehicles, their art collections, and their high society country club memberships were sold off on the courthouse steps. Eleanor was forced to sell her high society jewelry to cover outstanding legal fees, moving out of her grand Boston mansion and into a small, two-bedroom rented townhouse on the outskirts of the city, stripped of her status, her prestige, and her social standing. Julian was forced to take an entry-level compliance job at an insurance firm, paying 40% of his monthly wage directly into a court-ordered restitution fund to repay the remaining debts. He spent his nights living in a tiny apartment, completely alienated from the high society circles he had once taken for granted. Meanwhile, my life expanded into an era of extraordinary prosperity, power, and personal fulfillment. Vanguard Corporate Restructuring successfully integrated the acquired maritime assets into a new, highly efficient logistics conglomerate known as Huff Maritime Global, generating over $200 million in annual regional trade revenue. I purchased a historic oceanfront estate in Marblehead, Massachusetts, converting it into my personal sanctuary where I hosted genuine friends, trusted colleagues, and leaders who valued character over social titles. I established the Madison Huff Female Leadership Foundation, a $15 million philanthropic endowment that provides executive training, venture capital seed funding, and corporate mentorship for self-made women pursuing high-level careers in finance, property law, and corporate restructuring. Sitting on the private terrace of my oceanfront estate, watching the morning sun rise over the Atlantic Ocean, holding a warm cup of tea with absolute peace in my heart, I know with certainty that true wealth is never defined by old family names or arrogant titles. It is built on competence, proven through character, and protected by those who know their own unshakable worth.
Educational lesson. This story highlights a vital lesson regarding financial intelligence, hidden leverage, and the danger of predatory class-based discrimination. Arrogant individuals often mistake quiet humility for weakness, using performative status to intimidate those they perceive as inferior. However, true power in modern society is backed by actual balance sheets, legal ownership, and liquid competence, not historical titles or country club memberships. When entitled families attempt to use prenuptial agreements or public humiliation to enforce control, they risk exposing their own hidden financial vulnerabilities to those who hold the real leverage. Humility is a choice. Competence is absolute. Personal advice. If you're entering a relationship or corporate environment where you're judged, belittled, or tested based on assumptions about your background or net worth, do not waste energy trying to prove yourself through emotional arguments. Keep your financial sovereignty secure. Maintain complete independence over your assets, and observe how people treat you when they believe you have no leverage. If a partner fails to defend your dignity against arrogant family members, accept that betrayal as invaluable information. Walk away cleanly, enforce your legal and financial boundaries with absolute precision, and let your independent success be your ultimate answer.